I remember talking to him in January at the Mr. Football when I asked him about the Julio Jones comparisons. He said he could be better. I said, okay, we'll see. And I said, okay, do it against Georgia, that's known for its defensive backfield. Great defense, hasn't allowed a touchdown all season. I'll believe it if you can do it against Georgia. And then he did it against Georgia.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I am Ben Flanagan, and it was gut check time in Tuscaloosa on Saturday. Kalen DeBoer coached his first ever SEC game against Kirby Smart's Georgia Bulldogs in an instant classic, an absolute thriller in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And we're going to look ahead to Alabama's game this week, a road test at Vanderbilt with AL.com reporter and our resident Nashville expert, Matt Stahl, in just a bit. But first, let's welcome in AL.com college football writer Michael Casagrande and Beat Everyone producer Matt Scalici. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Ben. Hey, nerd.
Happy Monday, guys.
Yeah, it's a Monday, all right. Michael, you're in the building on Saturday, and the first thing I want to ask you, because you're a guy who has a great instinct for noticing things in a stadium other than the game, right? You give fans an inside look at the atmosphere, and something that I've seen in the last few days is a lot of chatter about the Bryant-Denny Stadium experience. Kirk Herbstreit raved about it on Twitter. He called the game. Josh Pate was there. He called it the best environment in college football right now. And there's always been this refrain from the rest of the country that it's good by default because Alabama's been the best program in the country, but pound for pound, it isn't one of the best atmospheres and experiences. But when it's on, fans, when they are engaged, it is great. There's no place like it. So, Michael, how would you grade the Bryant-Denny atmosphere on Saturday?
So, yeah, I've been covering games in that stadium since 2009. And people ask me, was that the loudest? Was that the greatest? It's hard to fully rate those and say what was louder, this or that. But it was up there. It was as a live wire as I've seen it. The place was hopping. We were on the field. We could be on the field from the final 6 minutes in. And the tension in that stadium, the noise, the night game factor certainly helps. The lights, fans love the lights, the flashing lights, different effects they can put on that. So it was as good as it gets. It's hard to say, is it the best in the nation? LSU still at night is still a tough one, a tough nut to crack. Flashing lights or not, but it was hard to top being in that moment in that night on that field. It was as good as it gets.
Matt, it's kind of changed a bit. I went to college at Alabama, and there were no LED lights, right? It was really about the football, about the game, and that's what made it a really fantastic experience. I mean, the loudest I've ever heard it, arguably Florida in 2005. I mean, right. Obviously, during the Saban years, there have been one classic after another. But what do you think about Bryant-Denny? Like, is it to you? Is it one of the best college football environments? And what did you think of what you saw on Saturday?
I mean, I think it is. I think it is extremely conditional in terms of like when it gets super loud and powerful in there. And I don't know that celebratory is maybe the right word. It's that there's sort of a snowball effect to it. And I think when things are going really well for Alabama in a game that the fans really care about, it gets wild in there. I will say, and this is not a knock to the fan base. They couldn't control this if they tried. This is just a phenomenon that happens. I think that place gets really quiet when it's not going well. And that isn't necessarily true of every stadium that I've been to in the SEC. And Michael, I'm sure, can attest to this too. One of the things that gets Auburn's stadium, for example, so much sort of praise and notoriety is that those fans stay like that even when it's not going well. And sometimes it seems to like put them back in a game that's not necessarily going the team's way. There is a front runner element to the Alabama crowd, and that's good for them because they're often in front. They have been a dominant program for a really long time. They love seeing their team bullying somebody else, and that's what was happening at the start of that game. And I do think it's sort of it probably does get into an opponent's head when nothing's going your way and the place is just on fire. It's tough to overcome that, like, emotionally.
I've got an example. I can give Alabama fans some credit. I think of a very important example of a time where there was a big impact. It was the first interception of the game. Georgia's third drive. Alabama's up 14-0. Third and long. Carson Beck sees the pressure coming. He changes the play at the line. Kirby Smart says after the game, the receivers did not get the check for the screen pass. Jackson, Alabama's cornerback, read it the whole way, jumped on it, intercepted that ball, had the ball at the 22-yard line. It was the shortest drive of the game. Every other drive, both teams scoring, were long 60, 70, 80-yard drives. That was a freebie, in a sense, touchdown, and the final score was separated by a touchdown. So congratulations, Bryant-Denny Stadium. You won that game for the Crimson Tide, because it's not always a thing that causes – they don't always cause that kind of havoc that impacts a game where, like, an LSU does.
If I'm producing a piece of AL.com content, what I just heard was podcast producer labels Alabama fans, quote, front runners in vicious rant. We'll get that up a little bit later on the site. But listen, I mean, in terms of big game feel, I think there's nothing better than Bryant-Denny, especially like when they're about to kick off, Thunderstruck kicks in, the team's walking out to the field. There's just been a flyover, which there was on Saturday. I mean, there's really nothing like it. It's an awesome experience. And so I understand. And yeah, when the lights go down, when the sun sets and the lights hit Bryant-Denny and you've got the Reds, you've got the strobes, like, it's a pretty awesome experience. So it was a perfect environment for a game like that. And I want to focus on the game now, because a big question going into it was, which team will we learn from the most, no matter the result, right? Like, it's Kalen DeBoer's first season, so a loss to Kirby Smart's well-established Georgia program wouldn't be the end of the world, and a Georgia win would seem kind of like a status quo thing. And a Bama win would show that DeBoer was maybe a little ahead of schedule in the post-Saban era and perhaps spell some trouble for where Kirby's program is. So we do have a result, but let's focus on Alabama, Michael. Big picture-wise, after that game, what was your takeaway about this team and where they're at right now?
It's funny because I know we're quoting Avery Johnson, and we're going to quote Kirby Smart, because he said it right off the bat in his opening statement. It was a tale of two halves. It was kind of two different games. They almost canceled each other out in the end. There was a winner, it wasn't a tie, but you learned a lot. You saw a lot of great things from Alabama. I said those first 18 minutes might have been the best 18 minutes of Alabama football I've seen when you stack that against the opponent. Completely dominant, great game plan, physically dominating. Just everything that could have gone right went right. Even when they committed penalties, they overcame them. It was, I thought that the Jalen's touchdown to make it 28-0, the block that Jalen Milroe threw on Jalen Walker knocked his helmet off. It was everything that Nick Saban could have wanted to see sitting in the box. It was physically dominant. Georgia was submitting it almost at that point. They had absolutely no fight until they flipped that switch, and it did change. So you saw that they had a great game plan early. They were able to withstand the fight that Georgia put up. It had very much the feel of the 2010 Canback Iron Bowl to me. I wrote that in my column, that taking a big lead, the rival comes back, takes the lead on you, and Alabama couldn't respond in that game. And this time, Ryan Williams, who was 3 years old in that moment in 2010, was the hero this time. So you learn that they have the explosive ability. They could look as good as anybody in the country at times, and they had the ability to give up a big lead. So what did we learn? We learned a lot in small bites, and you can digest it however you want.
Matt, I said instant classic earlier. Paul Feinbaum said it might have been the best SEC game he's seen in 40 years of covering college football. Hyperbole aside, perhaps, it seemed like the entire world was tuned in and really kind of felt that way about it. What about you? I mean, you've been watching this stuff for a long time. Is that on a short list of best you've ever seen?
Definitely because of the way that the fourth quarter went, I think it will be memorable. I think that's that's a Daniel Moore worthy finish to a game for sure. And I think regular season games have gone by the wayside a lot of times for Alabama in the last 15 years because there's so much focus on the postseason and the championships. And I think this is a great example of a regular season game that might stick in people's memories because there was so much weight and narrative to it going into the game it's not going to vanish over time. I don't think there will be any point where we say it didn't really mean anything in retrospect to beat a Georgia team coached by Kirby Smart that had won 2 national championships in the last 5 years. That's always going to be significant and not diminish over time. So I think it will hold weight for people. I mean, the thing that's in terms of takeaways from the game, like Michael was saying, it's so hard to know whether this game plan was hyper specific to Georgia and to this situation even because Georgia, of course, was coming into this game knowing so little about what Kalen DeBoer and his staff were actually going to do at Alabama and what their defensive schemes were going to look like, what the offense was going to look like in an ideal situation. They had an element of surprise that they will not have again going forward. So it's tough to know, is Alabama going to play the rest of their SEC schedule by only giving their running backs the ball 11 times during the game? I would imagine not. I would bet that was a hyper-specific plan tailored to this game. I think that it's frustrating probably for fans to see it get tight in the second half, but I think there's so many factors that go into that, and we can get into that if you want to. But I think this was about winning this one game, and I think that for the most part, look, they obviously did come out on top, but I think you can't expect a staff to win this game, 52-0. It's Georgia at the end of the day, and they were going to figure things out along the way. The fact that Alabama was able to jump on them as furiously as they did at the start of the game not only is why they won in the end, but it's incredibly impressive from a coaching standpoint that they were able to put together a plan that let them do that.
It was stunning, truly. And
Yeah.
Georgia then had to plan to adjust to it and counteract it with a fourth quarter that was, 21-0 until the final 2 minutes, just like Alabama was 21-0 in the first quarter. So.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, and we're going to get to Jalen Milroe in a second. But, Michael, the story that people can't and won't stop talking about anytime soon is Ryan Williams. I mean, this freshman phenom. I mean, there was a ton of hype around the kid. It's hard to deliver on that, but he keeps doing it, one spectacular play after another. And really, before they even kicked off on Saturday, he had done that in the first few games. But he absolutely electrified the crowd with an incredible juke on one play, a bobble and a catch on another, and then obviously the leaping catch, double spin move for a go-ahead 75-yard touchdown. This kid, whose age everybody knows, is just unbelievable so far in the biggest moments.
Yeah, no, I remember talking to him in January at the Mr. Football when I asked him about the Julio Jones comparisons. He said he could be better. I said, okay, we'll see. In the summertime, the players were saying that he was looking great in practice. I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. How does that translate to the first game? He comes out against a great Western Kentucky team that almost beat Bill O'Brien's Boston College team this weekend and had a great game in his college opener. I said, okay, do it against a power team. He did it against Wisconsin. And I said, okay, do it against Georgia that's known for its defensive backfield. Great defense, hasn't allowed a touchdown all season. I'll believe it if you can do it against Georgia. And then he did it against Georgia. So I am officially a Ryan Williams believer now. I think this kid's got it. I think he might have a good future ahead of him. But no, his footwork, that was something we were watching with the rewatch last night. The way, I mean, he was almost like a classically trained dancer. The way his knowledge of his feet, where they are, it's really impressive. Whether he's 17, 27, doesn't matter. This guy's a star.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter somebody posted when he made the spin move and the Georgia DBs collided into each other. He said it looked like this is what Kevin was doing to Harry and Marv in Home Alone. Like he'd set booby traps for him. It was hilarious. Totally incredible performance by Ryan Williams. Like you said, the kid's a star. He's already established himself as one of like the great Alabama receivers, but the season is still young. His career is still very young. He is very young. But Matt, Jalen Milroe had nearly 500 yards on offense. He threw for 374 and a couple of touchdowns. He ran for more than 100 with 2 more scores. You know, we've heard the strategy to stop Jalen Milroe. Make him make the throws. Kirby Smart said that, and he also said this, quote, they've got a guy back there at quarterback that could be the best running back in the country, and he throws the ball. We'll see how Jalen Milroe feels about that quote if anybody asks him about it, because running quarterbacks, in terms of the perception that people have about them, they don't love that. But Jalen looked poised. He made the throws downfield. He led sustained drives, and now we're hearing he's the Heisman frontrunner. His NFL stock is up. What did you see from Jalen Milroe against Georgia?
Well, incredibly accurate, obviously, for most of the game, which I think counters a little bit of that he's a running back that can throw the ball thing. One of the big knocks you've heard on him was his struggles with the intermediate passing game. I thought he actually did a very good job with that in this game, particularly utilizing the running backs and the tight ends, who became a much bigger part of the passing game than we've seen thus far. And those were a big way that they picked up a lot of those third downs over the course of the game, especially in the first half. I know they did obviously struggle with it some in the second half. It's up to smarter people than me to determine why that was and whether it was play calling related or not. But I mean, I think when the offense was clicking, Jalen Milroe was throwing every kind of pass on every area of the field. And I think he was also making great reads because he's very clearly being given the freedom to make decisions, whether it's a run pass option play or whether it's just sort of a traditional, read option run from the beginning play. As we talked about, I think it was the third or fourth touchdown where it was his decision to read the defensive end, and Jam Miller absolutely popped the helmet off of a Georgia defender, and it was over. I mean, Jalen Milroe made the perfect read and timed it perfectly, and it turned a 4th and 1 into a long touchdown run. I don't think there are a lot of quarterbacks in the country physically capable of making a play like that one right there. But also, it isn't just his legs. It's not just his body. That play is a great example of how fast his brain is operating during a play to make the perfect read at the perfect moment to pull that ball back in and completely eliminate the edge defender from the play. This is a guy who very much is seeing the field and is operating an offense at a very high level. I think there are obviously things that he can do better, but I think another big part of this too is he's operating very confidently because his offensive line is doing a great job right now. They kept him clean all night, 0 sacks for Jalen Milroe in this game. He feels safe back there, and he feels like he has time and room to operate.
Can I make one more point? Just one more on the Milroe. I wrote it in my rewind for Monday morning, Sunday night. The second touchdown, the throw to Jam Miller out of the backfield into the end zone might have been his best throw. He got to stack up some of the other throws he's thrown, but the spot where we were sitting in the press box had the perfect angle that the TV cameras didn't necessarily get, where he threw that ball so far out ahead of him. The spot where he threw it to where he was when he threw it, where Jam Miller was when he threw it, it almost looked like a throwaway. And the way that it arced, the way it bended right around that linebacker's helmet, really almost kissed the side of his helmet on the way by. And for the Jam Miller, a running back, to have the concentration to catch a ball thrown so perfectly, but in very specific way, was super impressive on both ends of it. I thought that might have been his best throw.
And it takes, like, that play only happens because Jalen Milroe understands Jam Miller's acceleration. He understands
Right.
exactly how long it's going to take him to get from A to B so that he'll be there when the ball gets there. And that's a chemistry thing with your players that comes from the entire offseason. And I'm sure a lot of that is also happening with Ryan Williams right now.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably felt like deja vu for Georgia because if you remember the SEC championship, one of the touchdown throws was a wheel route to Jam Miller on the left side of the field. And that came after, I believe, a rub route, right, where Jam Miller was wide open and all Jalen Milroe had to do was just get it there, and it's a touchdown. This play was defended. There was a defender right there, as Michael pointed out, and Milroe had to put it in the bucket, and he did. And I agree. That's arguably the best throw he's made as an Alabama quarterback. Good point, Michael. And Michael, Alabama jumped out to a 28-0 lead in the first half. They led 30-7 at the half. Georgia comes storming back, led by Carson Beck. In spite of his 4 turnovers, they managed to take the lead in the fourth quarter before the Milroe-Williams heroics. And a lot of fans were baffled by Alabama's clock management. I mean, Milroe ran it well, but running backs Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, they only combined for 11 total carries. Alabama seemed to rush drives late when they could have taken the air out of the ball. They were snapping with a lot of time left on the play clock. What do you make of the way that Alabama failed to protect that huge lead? Like, do you think in real time that there was more that they could and should have done?
It's interesting. With the clock management, I heard from home. I heard from my trusted sources back home who were anxiously watching the game with family. They were very upset about the clock management. And I didn't even realize it 'cause on the field. I wasn't necessarily looking at the play clock. And it was kind of surprising watching it back. 21 seconds, 20 seconds on the play clock. And my only thought was, Alabama didn't think that they had enough. There was too much time to run out, that they might need it themselves. And after that 67-yard touchdown pass to give Georgia the lead, they had 2 minutes and 30 seconds or whatever it was. If they needed it, they only needed 13, it turns out. But if they're trying to run, I know there are coaches who don't want to run the clock out, Vic. If they're trying to take the air out of the ball, it makes everyone complacent and it kind of settles everyone down to where they're no longer feeling the urgency of the moment. Believe it or not, and I don't know that as a fact, but it definitely could have done that. Defensively, Georgia's offense to Alabama's defense, they were definitely abusing some of the defensive backs late in the game, getting into a rhythm, wearing them down. You could see, watching it back, you could see DBs were huffing and puffing at the end of the game, and they started moving fast, and it was the snowball downhill. I think their final 3 touchdown drives were 6 plays, 4 plays, and then 1 play. From that 15-play drive, that was a marathon, grinding it out on those 4th downs to just hitting that overdrive. They wore them out.
Yeah, and Matt, I mean, game's over. Alabama beats Georgia again. The college football playoff is officially in sight for Alabama, and the playoff would have been on the table for whoever lost the game, and it certainly still is for Georgia. But Alabama is sitting at number 1 in the AP rankings now. They're undefeated, and not to overlook Vandy and South Carolina, but their next big test comes on the road against a really dangerous Tennessee team, I believe on October 19th. So now that becomes a winner. Like, I think win or lose, one of those teams is going to make the playoff. And even if they lose to Tennessee, and that means they don't make the SEC championship game, a one-loss Alabama team is making the playoff. So a win was kind of the best possible result for Alabama this past weekend in the grand scheme of things, wasn't it?
Well, we don't know what criteria we're going to hear from the playoff committee in the 12-team era. If we're going by the things they used to talk about being important, Alabama has easily the best win in college football so far, and I think that's going to echo for the rest of the season anytime people think about Alabama. They also have what I would say, by no means do they have an easy schedule, but because of the way the new divisionless scheduling works in the SEC, there are some very unequal distribution of the best teams in the league right now between different schedules. And Alabama happens to have maybe dodged a lot of the more dangerous, more powerful teams. They don't have to play Texas. They don't have to play Ole Miss, although who knows about Ole Miss at this point. But you've got Georgia behind you. It's a win. Texas is not a team Alabama's going to have to see in the regular season. They do have Tennessee, as you mentioned, still looming. Missouri is still undefeated. I don't know that anybody really takes them seriously quite yet, and until they play one of those maybe higher ranked, one of the top 4 teams, let's say, in the SEC. But I think look, when you look at Georgia's schedule, when you look at Texas's schedule, I think you'd rather be Alabama right now, particularly with that one win over Georgia. They're in great position, and as good as Georgia and Texas and Tennessee might be, just because of the nature of how scheduling lines up, Alabama could be in a better position than the rest of them, even with a loss to Tennessee, to not only make the playoff, but make it to the SEC championship and have a shot at that first round bye.
Yeah, and I feel like I realize I said the best possible outcome would be for them to win. That's clear and obvious, right? But all I mean by that is if they lost, they would still be a potential playoff team, but now they could afford that loss to Tennessee if that happened. I mean, they could very well blow Tennessee out for all I know, but
right.
Now they have a little bit more breathing room if they do happen to lose sometime later in the schedule, whether that's Tennessee, Missouri. I mean, Auburn, obviously crazy things happen in that game despite where they're at. But
it's in Tuscaloosa, so we know that's I mean, this will get clipped
they bring
later.
it with them.
They
bring it with them.
The voodoo is not typically in Jordan-Hare Stadium, but yes,
you were just
it's happening.
cutting clips. You were cutting sound bites for someone to go back one day. You've been talking about Vanderbilt. I mean, all kinds of people are coming.
No, look,
for you.
I will say this. I don't think Alabama has any easy games left on their schedule. I don't think they have. They don't have any. Other than there is I believe. Is there another non-conference game?
There's an FCS game.
Mercer.
Is there a Mercer game? So look, other than that, I do think all of Alabama's SEC opponents. They don't get Mississippi State, who seems to be kind of the easy pickings this
They're the
year.
worst. They're the worst.
But look, South Carolina blew out Kentucky earlier this season. Missouri is undefeated right now. Vanderbilt is extremely for Vanderbilt anyway. They're very dangerous.
They're very cute for Vanderbilt.
So, and look, and then you look down the line, and there's Oklahoma waiting the week before the Iron Bowl. This is not a cakewalk schedule by any means, but to be able to have to no longer have to worry about looming games against top 4 opponents beyond Tennessee, I think it's a bit of a luxury for an SEC team right now.
Last question for you, Michael. People kind of dreaded Saturday for a few different reasons, obviously for the game and all the anxiety that a big game brings, but there was also heightened security. There were celebrities in the house, a former president. So getting into the game, getting into the stadium would be a madhouse. And, there was a similar excitement and tension in the air in 2019 for the LSU game. But how do you think it all played out when you were out in it among the people?
Yeah, it was interesting because the security did seem to be enhanced even from that 2019 game. We were forced to drive through we had to have our cars searched and examined and poked and prodded and trunks tossed by Secret Service. That wasn't the case a few years ago. But I arrived early enough, as Alabama warned. I was at that gate 3.5 hours beforehand. I got my credential, went in, and never left. So I wasn't out in it as much as I usually would be. It seemed like the crowd filled it very early. They heeded the warnings about early arrival. I don't know if I didn't hear any complaints about people getting stuck outside. So in terms of the enhanced security, it all seemed to go exactly as they had wanted to go.
Yeah, it was interesting. College game day was in Tuscaloosa, and so it drew a huge crowd starting at like 6 a.m. basically when they all gather and pile in there on the quad. So it felt like 2 days in one. But I'll be honest with you, Michael, 3.5 hours with that press box food right there, that seems dangerous, man. Like, that's a long 3 hours before kickoff anyway, but you got to figure out how to fill the time. I guess you could do some work, but man.
Tear up that golden flake.
Yeah, just hanging out with the guys, watching the games. It's just it's exactly what everyone thinks it is. Hanging out, watching all the TVs, watching the Auburn game. Yeah, it could be worse.
Well, he's Michael Casagrande, AL.com college football writer. He's Matt Scalici, Beat Everyone producer. Go read Michael's stuff. Follow him at by Casagrande. Michael, Matt, thank y'all for doing this.
Always a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Ben.
All right, let's bring in AL.com Alabama football reporter Matt Stahl. This man is from Nashville. There's no better person to give us the scoop on the Crimson Tide's upcoming opponent, but perhaps even more importantly, to tell us where to go eat in the Music City this weekend. Matt Stahl, welcome back.
Oh man, thanks for having me. Always glad to talk about a tourist trap of a hometown.
Well, we're over a big one. Obviously, Georgia's in the rear view now, and I want to talk Vandy now. They opened the season with a monster overtime win over Virginia Tech, and they followed it up with a 55-0 blowout over Alcorn State. And suddenly it's like, who are these Vanderbilt Commodores? Who are these guys? But then they lose to Georgia State, and it's like, oh, they're Vandy, right? But then they lose in double overtime to a top 10 team in Missouri on the road. So, Matt, I sense an identity crisis here. Like 1 week, this isn't your average Vandy pushover, and then another, they fit the bill. So which Vanderbilt will Alabama see on Saturday?
Well, it's the Diego Pavia show either way. They bring in the New Mexico State quarterback this season. Jerry Kill, who was coaching him, was on that now on that coaching staff at Vanderbilt as a they still call him analyst, so they can all have headsets on during games now. So I couldn't actually tell you what his real role is, but he's on staff there, and I mean they're just doing a lot of stuff that's a little different than you're likely to see in the SEC in a given week. It's pretty little kind of option-y stuff. Your quarterback claims to be 6 feet tall, which I mean, looking at him, that's stolen valor from the rest of us who lied just a little bit about being 6 feet tall. Like, come on, man, that dude's 5'6" at best, I think. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun team. They'll take you down to the wire if you're not careful. But I mean, you saw in the Missouri game, they probably are not quite where they need to be to go beat a top 10 team yet.
It was just a few years when it was just a few years ago when Vandy had a big win going into an Alabama week, and they had a full head of steam. And there may have been a little viral trash talk, and then Alabama steamrolled them 59-0. But Clark Lee appears to have them playing competitive football at least. And after what we've seen from Alabama so far, this is by no means a team without flaws, right? So what do you think is there that Vanderbilt could exploit or expose, if anything, this week?
Like I said, I think it's the same thing that, the academy teams would go get the occasional like upset on, or like a Georgia Southern team would go get an occasional upset on, where it's just like what they're doing is so different with all the option stuff than you're seeing in a given week. Like you kind of have to just shift gears in practice. Like you're just seeing something you don't game plan for usually in the kind of Pavia-led offense here. So, I mean, mostly that. I think Alabama's good enough to take whatever punches come from Vanderbilt in this game. At least, I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, you'd hope so. But, I mean, I think Clark Lee deserves a lot of credit because this team they look competent in some games now. Like, the tail end of the Derek Mason era, that wasn't the case. Like, it was it may have been the worst college football team like in FBS. Like they're losing to everybody. They had that. It was 2020 where they completely defeated. Like they didn't win a game that year. So some credit is due to Clark Lee, I think, for A, trying things a little different, and B, just like having some baseline of competence at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, man, what a signature quote for a Vanderbilt season. We looked competent out there. So I think they're going to put that like in the locker room maybe for the rest of the season. So congrats to you. So 4 games into this season with Alabama, Matt, what are their biggest weaknesses? Like whether it's Vanderbilt or another team that's left on the schedule, someone is going to find wrinkles in Alabama the way that Georgia did at halftime this past weekend, and they're going to give them trouble. So how do you think they're going to do it?
You watch a lot of Washington games last year? Because they kind of did the same thing, where there were some games it just seemed like Washington needed to pull like one last trick out at the very, very end to make a game happen. So, I think maybe they're starting to float towards that same identity here. But if there was I guess the weakness from that Georgia game was, I mean, Georgia adjusted to some things they were doing, and it seemed like towards the end, like maybe you were kind of out of tricks there, and then you just needed to hit the Ryan Williams button, which, to be clear, good button. Like if you have it, you should press that thing a bunch of times and just see what happens. But yeah, it's mostly that. I think you'd like to see them just adjust a little better in that game to what Georgia was throwing at them when that comeback was happening.
Yeah, another Vandy note here, Matt. Nick Saban told Pat McAfee recently that Vanderbilt is the easiest place to play in the SEC. And he said, quote, "The only place you play in the SEC that's not hard to play is Vanderbilt. You have more fans than they have. That's no disrespect to them. It's the truth," end quote. Matt, is that the truth? Like maybe he's stating the obvious, but does that maybe give Clark Lee and his team a little bulletin board material to work with, especially with Alabama still riding this high after the Georgia win?
I mean, it gives you a little bulletin board material up until the game starts and the entire crowd is in crimson. This is going to be a home game for Alabama for sure. In the same way, I mean, Tennessee comes to town and is a home game. Uh, the best journalism school in the United States came there one time, and it was pretty much a home game for Western Kentucky. Uh, Everybody just kind of gets an extra home game at Vanderbilt. It seems like they're kind of leaning into it too, with the stadium renovations that they're doing. Like they're not expanding capacity for Vanderbilt fans. Like they're making things nicer. So when you make your one road trip to Nashville every year, you can go enjoy the like nicer, more kind of elevated stadium experience for more money. It's if it's bulletin board material, like I don't know what to tell you. Like that's just how it is, how it was, and how it will be for that program.
Listen, these things aren't going unnoticed, these little slip-ins. In the last segment, Michael Casagrande called Western Kentucky a great Western Kentucky team, and now we get the best journalism school in the country. I wonder what the common denominator is here, Stahl. Okay, let's forget about football for a minute. You're from Nashville. We need some insider tips, okay? Like, we know about the hot chicken. We know about Broadway. We know about all the honky-tonks, the bachelorette parties, the party bikes, right? The reality stars who migrated to this city, which looks a lot different than if, for instance, the last time you caught Alabama there was for a road game back in 2007. Much different place than it was back then. But even if it's just one place, Matt, where should Alabama fans go this weekend to get the real Nashville experience?
So the thing I always tell people is you can kind of skip hot chicken. Like it's good. I like hot chicken a lot if you're going to do that. I mean, Hattie B's is really touristy, but it's as good as it like advertised. That's very good. And if you want to do something a little different, maybe more authentic, you can pop out to Bolton's, which I like, and then the hot fish there is great. Uh, but we invented meat and three. And it's like we came up with it. I don't know how much credit you can really take on meat and three. Like it's a pretty obvious concept, but like the pushing cafeteria trays through and like all that is us. So I mean Arnold's is always the first place that comes to mind. Really, really good, sort of over in the Gulch. They closed down a while back, and we're gonna sell their building and get the owner paid before she retired. But that sale fell through, so they're like, all right, I mean, we'll just reopen. Cool. So they're back, and I mean, it's great. They got roast beef every day. They got fried chicken every day. Everything on their menu is awesome. All the sides are great. The other one, another place been open a long time is Sweats, SWETT apostrophe S. Another really great meat and three. I might actually like that one a little better. That's yeah, same kind of deal. You're going in there for fried chicken, beef tips and rice, the whole deal. So yeah, find a really good meat and three would be my advice.
All right, but this isn't like the Tuscaloosa restaurant draft earlier this season, right? What did you say? Like you said, like Taco Bell is the best Mexican food in town in
No,
Tuscaloosa,
no,
right?
you
Like
said City Cafe is good food, and lying to the people out
hey
here. That's
man,
pandering.
you
You
don't
know
want to
that's
go.
not
You
good.
don't want to go there, Matt. Be careful, man. You don't want to go there. Okay, like I'm accepting what you're saying here about meat and threes and in Nashville, and I'm sure people are going to be willing to try it. But let's be careful. You're a Nashvillian, not a Nashvillian. Okay, so I just want to make sure that this is as authentically Nashville as it gets. That's all I'm looking for here in this conversation.
How long do you have to think of that? Nashville, not Nashville in line. Were you stewing on that last night?
No, just in the last few seconds when you took a shot at City Cafe. I didn't appreciate that. I don't think the state of Alabama appreciates that. Not even the Southeast, probably, where City Cafe ranks high atop the rankings in meat and three lists. So, Matt Stahl, this is a bit, man. This is a gimmick, right? You're going wrestling heel, and if you're going to stick with it, I applaud you, but you've been warned, okay?
All right, well, I'm all in. I mean, there's other things you can do in Nashville too. If you want something a little different, Tuscaloosa, obviously, all in on the wet rib, which is great. I love Archibald's. I like Dreamland. But slide over to Peg Leg Porker for they do a dry rub rib that's as good as you'll find. That's really awesome. Um, there's also so Martin's Barbecue is really good, but I mean, there's one in Birmingham now, which I don't think is as good as the ones in Nashville for some reason. But that's probably a personal preference thing, and there's good barbecue elsewhere in Birmingham. But the owners do have this place called Hugh Babies, which is this really awesome burger joint. They got a few locations around the city. Great burgers, great milkshakes. The thing I get though, they do a smoked bologna sandwich there, and that's what you want. That's awesome.
I would say to Alabama fans after hearing all this, pace yourself, okay? Dry rub ribs, smoked bologna sandwiches, meat and threes, beef tips and rice. Good Lord, that all sounds great, but I would just say, listen, one meal at a time. Be careful. But
Yeah,
this
eat a
is
salad
amazing.
somewhere.
Yeah, well, when
Maybe.
the dressing is barbecue sauce, right, probably in Nashville, then what's the point? But yeah, throw the salad in there. AL.com, Alabama football reporter Matt Stahl, a true Nashvillian. Matt, thank you for doing this.
Oh, anytime. Thank you.
Find Beat Everyone on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, like, rate, review, help us out. I'm Ben Flanagan. We'll see you next time. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.